Welcome to revolution.social, a podcast about the history and future of social media.
Here we are, episode 1, and you were able to get Jack Dorsey, a very notoriously reclusive figure in tech, but a very important one, somebody who was there with you at the very beginning of Twitter, to sit down for a long, intimate conversation. So why did you want to start this podcast with Jack?
Jack is an incredibly important figure in shaping social media. He's incredibly controversial, and I wanted to have a conversation where we went from the creation of Twitter through its growth, the problems it had, what happened when Elon Musk took over and bought Twitter, and then a bit about the creation of Bluesky. How did it come about? Where did Jack play a role? And why has he decided to focus on permissionless protocols like Nostr? So we get a whole history of Web 2.0, of social media, where we came from and where we're going in this conversation.
And then these are questions so many of us have. So let's not waste any time. Let's listen to the interview.
Welcome, Jack. This is the first episode of my podcast, Revolution.social. Jack Dorsey obviously is famous as the founding CEO of Twitter and Block and Square, but I want to dig into where we came from and what are the real dynamics that shape power in social media protocols and apps, and why do we need to go from social media apps, social media platforms, and into protocols. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just for the context of folks, Jack and I met back at Odeo, which was the podcasting company that eventually became Twitter.
And now we're doing a podcast.
It's kind of funny, 20 years after that, then we're like, oh yeah, maybe I actually want to do one of these podcasts. I remember in Odeo, we tried to convince NPR that they should do podcasting. And they were like, no, podcasting will never work. We've got our local radio affiliates, they'll work on it. So much of what we've done, people say, oh, that'll never work, or it's a crazy idea, or you've ever adopted it. And then after it happens, it becomes sort of obvious.
Yeah, always slightly too early. And the company's name was actually obvious.
Yeah.
That was the holding company for Odeo. Not obvious at the time. None of it was obvious when we were working on it.
No, that's the interesting thing. None of it was obvious that we were working on it. And, we'll get into the work we're doing today, but when we started talking about protocols as an alternative to centralized platforms, I remember I went in to talk to you when you were still CEO of Twitter, I think in 2018, talking about, hey, we should do some protocol stuff. And the Twitter executives were like, no, you shouldn't invest in it. Twitter shouldn't invest in it. Protocols undermine Twitter. And it took a bunch of years for you to sort of build up the ability to try and move Twitter towards a protocol.
I think it was even earlier than that, because Twitter was so, we used Rails initially. Well, initially it was C and Python, but then we got Florian, and he was a Rails core member, and we used Rails, and Rails had this incentive to be API focused. And Twitter at the time, in all of the Web 2 cohort of apps like Flickr and all these other things, was very much driven by the API first. And when we launched to a very small set of people, and then they invited their friends and their friends and their friends. But eventually people discovered the API, and the API was so simple that people kind of treated it like a protocol. That's what caused all of our downtime in the early days, is we were just the database for these things, and people were building all these clients. We got huge in Japan because the Japanese developers built a client for Twitter because our API was so open and it was so permissible in terms of what you could do with it, to the point where it actually brought us down every single day. we had no conception of rate limits or anything that would protect the overall system from developers not necessarily doing bad things, but just doing things that they wanted to do. And that's what was special about Twitter. You could come to it. You could, even if you're a brand new engineer, brand new programmer, like you're just getting into the space, you could actually code something that would end up buzzing your pocket's friend, which was just cool. Like you did something from a program that manifested in reality as a physical thing, like buzzing a phone. And so there was this faction within the company that like we should really invest more in that and being more of a protocol layer. And then there was another faction that no, we should close it down and be the business and like remove the API because there'll be competitive dynamics and all this. And for me, it took me a long time to realize this, and I didn't really put it into words until I came back as CEO the second time. But like, it's hard for something like that to be a company because you have corporate incentives when it wants to be a protocol. Like that was the pure expression of it from day one. And it was never really allowed to be that because it was on this fast track to becoming a public company. And then that set like the requirement for a business model, which was just a copy of what Facebook was doing with promoted tweets and ads. And then we were in this category of like being the smallest competitor in these giants of Google and Facebook. And basically you're at the whim then of these advertisers and these brand advertisers and like what they can do. And it creates a single point of failure because they can just remove the money and your revenue goes down completely. So if it were an open protocol, if it were truly an open project, you could build a business on top of it, and you could build a very healthy business
and
on top of it.
And people were building businesses on top of Twitter in the early days.
And they were helping Twitter as well. They were helping Twitter Inc. as well. But unfortunately, that was shut down on the path to IPO. And I think that was the that was the real miss. But it's, you know, all these are non-regrettable if you learn from them and you can build them into new energy and new direction, and that's what you know I intend to do and what you intend to do. And you know, now there's a much broader community focused on that, where the protocol doesn't have to be a corporation. It doesn't need to own the entire stack. It can own the presentation layer, it can own the interface and build a phenomenal business, but the foundation, the protocol, can be owned by everyone, and be a lot freer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember there was at one point this experiment to build the API that supported Jabber XMPP.
Yeah.
With the idea that you could run your own nodes and part of the thing, and the tech just didn't work.
Yeah.
Like what happened was the only way to make the tech work was this kind of centralized control and the amount of money that you needed to fund the building of it. And then everybody looks at you and they look at Twitter and they're like, why doesn't Twitter make different decisions?
Yeah.
You know, why doesn't Jack make different decisions? And the thing that always surprised me is people didn't realize that just being the CEO didn't mean that you get to make all the decisions. You're accountable to the investors, to the board, to the market.
Yeah.
We had that conversation early on. We were talking to tons of people about whether or not to ban Donald Trump early on in his presidency. And, you know, I am a far left anarchist and I hate Donald Trump and everything else. But what I told you at the time was, I don't think you can, because you have a fiscal responsibility to the investors and to the market. And there's private equity, and you don't have the agency that everyone thought you had.
Yeah. Well, I think, that move in particular, I think it was actually correct for the business at the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. It's like
we had advertisers who were threatening to leave, and that would tank our revenue, tank our stock price, and then people would leave the company because they'll find compensation elsewhere. But it was the wrong thing for the internet. It was the wrong decision for the internet. And we saw that play out when... I forget the social network name. There was a competitor, but it had much more lax moderation policies, and suddenly
like
all
Parler and Gab and those ones.
Yeah. So Parler, I think it was, and all the internet foundation companies started taking away like AWS and all the things that actually serve this thing, and then suddenly, one by one, I don't think they worked in concert, but they looked at each other. They're doing that. We should do that as well. And then suddenly they had no place to go on the internet, and their only option was serving themselves. But even DNS providers were taking those actions, and that's exactly wrong for the internet. And it shows exactly why protocols are so important, and it shows exactly why open internet standards are so important, so that can't happen. Like I became the single point of failure in that particular case, because any CEO making these decisions is effectively taking away the potential and taking away the potential voice because of business needs, because of business incentives. And in our particular case, it was advertisers, investors, and ultimately the market and our own employees. So it's a difficult position to be in as a public company. It sort of works better as a private company, but even that doesn't work, because you still have this single point of failure where one person is making the decisions for all the people using it. And it's seen more and more as a public utility, but it doesn't act like a public utility. It doesn't have the incentive of a public utility. It's just super challenging. So the only path is to recognize that the protocol layer should be open. It should be a standard. And there should be a standard for social media that's uncontrollable and permissionless, in the same way that there is one for email and one for the web and one for all these services that we now depend on, that people use. And that was the beautiful time of the internet, like when we had Gopher and the web and Usenet and IRC. All these things were completely decentralized. They worked really well, but what didn't work was discovery. And that's the thing that was centralized. That's what was centralized by Google. That's what was centralized by Facebook, by Twitter, by Slack. But you look at every one of those, and it's just like a corporate evolution centralizing discovery on a very open open internet protocol.
It's a kind of enclosing the commons.
Yes.
We built this internet commons of these different kind of protocols, these activities of the social space, and the specific companies discovered they could go in and control the discovery point, control that sort of single choke point, as sort of Cory Doctorow talks about choke point capitalism, and then make a tremendous amount of money there, but also exclude you from doing things that don't fit through their path.
Yeah, and it worked. But now we have the technology to decentralize discovery. But at the same time that we now have this technology, it's happening again with AI, where we do have a centralizing force in the form of corporations with their incentives, and their ability to change the models without people knowing about it, and change the prompts without people knowing about it, and inject things that make it look like the AI said it, but actually it's a corporate incentive, and it's all playing over and over again. So this is the importance to me of open source, open protocols, and then looking for ways, and I think there are very tangible, very compelling ways to build businesses on top, where you really own the interface and the experience, and you are valuable because you can execute the best. Mm-hmm. You have the best design, and you have the best experience, and you have the best capabilities off this shared protocol and off this shared understanding.
That innovation, those early days of Twitter, people thought of Twitter as an innovative company, but Twitter was a really innovative company in that it listened to its users.
Yeah.
Hashtags and @replies and the symbol for the username and trending topics and everything we think of as Twitter was just you listening to your users.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing about it was invented. It was all discovery. It was all just pulling the thread on what people are actually doing with this and what they want to do with it. We launched something and we thought it was this, and then they showed us, no, I want to use it this way. And it's broken this way, but if you fix it slightly, then it works. And, the @ symbol is an example of that. We launched it to be a way to share what you were doing in the world. And then people started
mentioning each other.
People started and the mentioning each other was no, they want to talk. They want to have conversations. And just doing the simple thing of anytime you see @ symbol name, link it to the profile page, and then put a reply tab on the home screen and also on their profile page. And suddenly Twitter went from being status updates to conversation. And then you saw the hashtag and you link that, and suddenly it went from being status and conversations to news and discovery about like what's happening in the world. And like, again, that was never the intention. It was all discovered, it was all pulling the thread. And I think that every service has this, no matter what the founder says. It's not like this divine invention. It's like, I built this thing, people are using it in a weird way. I build it, I tweak it slightly for that, and it blows up. And like every single success I've seen has more or less followed that path, even though people won't necessarily admit to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about sort of your first attempt at a helping create a decentralized social protocol, which is Bluesky, which you got funded out of Twitter. And I was invited as part of the sort of the committee to talk about the inner protocols, evaluate the things. And you ended up picking Jay as the CEO to go build it. And, you know, I'm on Bluesky. I know that you aren't right now, but I think there's two things interesting. One, it felt like everybody talked about it as Jack Dorsey's Bluesky and didn't give credit that it was a community project and it was a lot of people doing it. And Jay made adjustments to make it work more like Twitter and make it less permissionless. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you just want to talk about sort of the goals behind it and where it came from.
Yeah. About maybe a year or 2 years into me coming back as CEO of Twitter, decided that we needed to have the protocol detached from the company. So the goal was to build a protocol that everyone can contribute to. And there's a tweet thread that I put out because at the same time that I wanted to give up the protocol layer, we had to make it something that investors understood. And why would Twitter open up its protocol such that people can contribute into it and take off it as well and build competing interfaces? And the reason why is like, it's immensely valuable to Twitter if we have the most content in the world. And if we make it easy for people to inject the content and build interfaces on top of it to inject it and also benefit from that content, we have a higher probability of getting more content that we can place ads against or build commerce around or do a bunch of things that we had planned. So we put out this call we want to build a protocol. We want to hire 5 people. We did this at my other company, Square and Block,
yep.
Specifically for Bitcoin. We hired 5 open source engineers. We said we're not going to direct them at all. We're going to pay them in Bitcoin. We're not going to pay them in our stock. So they're incentivized by Bitcoin itself. And it worked. And that organization is called Spiral. And we can't tell them what to do. They work on whatever they want. And they built the LDK, which is a Lightning development kit, the Bitcoin development kit. They're up to 10 people right now. We just give them a yearly budget and they go. So I wanted to replicate that. That had been running for a year. I wanted to replicate that for Twitter, but for a social media protocol. We went about a different path than we did with Spiral, which is we created this community discussion on how best to approach this work. And brought in a bunch of people such as yourself and even Fiat Jaff, who created Nostr, to comment on it. And Jay organized a bunch of this work and did a bunch of the work. And we eventually decided that she was the best candidate for the work. And the goal at that time, and this is before the company was sold, was it would again have a yearly budget. It would be this organization within Square, like Spiral, is actually a part of the company, and we were open to that with Twitter and Bluesky. I actually called it Bluesky because we wanted it to be like this open protocol, and we wanted to leave it up to Jay or whoever we chose. Like, should we be in the company or should it be a separate entity?
I mean, I remember advocating for it being a separate entity.
Yeah.
Because after leaving Odeo, I'd gone off and worked at Yahoo with Katarina Fake and Stuart Butterfield, some of the Flickr folks. And Flickr was sort of held back by the fact that it was inside Yahoo.
Yeah.
And so my hope was if Bluesky was spun off as a funded but independent entity, it wouldn't face the sort of potential middle management frustration with seeing it as a competitor.
Yeah. I think if Twitter wasn't sold, that would have been the wrong decision. I think it should have stayed in the company, just like Spiral has, because we're not competing with it. Like it's something that like we want to build on top of, and it protects it more. But given it was sold, it was probably the right decision. But it also created a different perverse incentive of like, okay, well now the company is sold, we're probably not going to get more money from Twitter proper, so we need to find money for ourselves, and that means we need to get VCs. And it's a public benefit corporation. And to me, that was not the intention at all. That's when I left, is because I don't want to be on another board. I don't want to help another company build this thing. Even if it is purely building a protocol, it still has incentives to a VC base. And that's not it for me. Like this has to be more of a public good completely and have none of those incentives. And around that time, I found Fiat Jeff's markdown on Nostr, and I just read it. I'm like, he's diagnosed every single problem Twitter has. He's got a very simple, effective solution. And it's not a corporation. It's not VC funded. I'm just going to grant him Bitcoin and like, let's see where this thing goes. And then I just became all in because I love the community. I love the energy around it, and I love the principles more importantly. And they were less they were more tamper proof than what Bluesky is now in a situation around. Like it's for me, it's not even about the permissionless aspect of it. It's just like the structure behind it is going to create incentives that I think are going to be challenging, independent of like how great Jay is. I think Jay is great. I think the team is great, but the structure is what I disagree with. And I want to push the energy in a different direction, which is more like Bitcoin, which is completely open and not owned by anyone from a protocol layer. And that's what I see in Nostr as well. But that's where I want to push my energy, is stuff like that, rather into the more corporate direction, even if it is a public benefit corporation.
Yeah, and I
which, by the way, all the AI companies right now,
they're all public benefit corporations, but public benefit corporations are still, you can take account for workers and the environment and society, but you still have stakeholders and a bottom line. It's still a for-profit company.
You're determining what public benefit means.
Yeah,
as that organization.
I very much agree. Like, I like Jay, I like Paul, I like Brian and Y and a bunch of the other folks at Bluesky. I want them to succeed. But when I looked at what they were doing and the work, I looked at the Nostr protocol and the app protocol. They're very similar.
Yep.
But the Nostr protocol I could participate in, I could run my part of it, and I didn't have to ask for permission. And it is developed like the open source bazaar. There's no company at the center of it. Whereas Bluesky is very much driven as an open protocol, but a company at the center of it. And I'm worried that the market incentives around it are going to push them to have to make some tough decisions. And it's part of
they already have.
Yeah,
they already have, because they've had to push more on moderation, for instance, and even bow to some governments in particular. So again, like, it's already played out in a way that I feared, given what it is. And Nostr is more tamper-proof, and protocols like that are more tamper-proof because they don't have these single points of failure of organizational structure that control the protocol layer.
And part of the reason I'm doing this podcast and I'm launching this social media Bill of Rights is so that we can give people a clear idea on how to hold Bluesky accountable in a way that they want. But they can't just do it internally. We need a community on the outside. We need both alternative protocols that are viable alternatives that show that you can build this in this open, permissionless way. And we need clear ways in which we can say, Bluesky can and can't do these things going forward, because users need accountability on their, trust and safety system. You get to decide what your governance system is. You get to decide, you own your name, you own your content, you own your relationships. You have the right to exit, adversarial interoperability, like Cory Doctorow talks about.
Yeah.
Like, You have the right to choose your algorithms, portability, like all of these things Bluesky tries to do right now, but they could walk away from.
Yeah. I think they could walk away from them. They could also try to do them and do them well, but they may be compelled to walk away from them. So
Yeah.
like I just
That's the worry. Not that they aren't well-meaning and trying to do the right thing.
Exactly. A lot of these CEOs and leaders and these structures are all well-meaning, but it's what the pressure points on them are, and that's what worries me. I would take the other side of that, and I would say like it's just not going to be possible for these orgs to live up to the rights that you mentioned, because they have these single points of failure, and you can't get around them.
That brings up a really interesting point. A lot of people are angry at you for advocating for and publicly talking about Elon buying Twitter and what happened to it, but they don't understand that he wasn't the first private equity attempt at taking over Twitter. It was Elliott Capital and Silver Lake who had a seat on the board and were concerned about it. And
wasn't the first company or entity that tried to buy Twitter either.
Exactly.
But any public company is for sale. It's
Exactly.
the highest bidder, like the fiduciary responsibility of the board is to return to shareholders that by law. So if they get a crazy offer, any public company, they must take it by law. They must. It doesn't matter who it is. So
it's not like you had a choice where you're like, oh no, we're gonna not try and close this deal. I mean, I know that you weren't in the decision-making seat by the time things actually closed, but people think, oh, well, Jack's the founder, therefore he should be able to, decide everything.
Independent of Elon, I did not believe that Twitter could survive as a public company. It had to be private, or it had to be part of something else that could protect it while it transitioned away from pure advertising, because it just could not survive, because we're competing with Google and Facebook for ad revenue, which is nearly impossible. We would always be in that race until we switched our business model. And switching the business model means you take attention off the thing that's keeping you alive and you put it into something else, and you hope that it's going to work. But that's a 2 to 3 year process to even do that. And being a public company at the same time with the stock going up and down and employees looking at that stock price is just an impossible situation. So I thought it was great that there was an offer for it to be private. And I thought it was also great that it wasn't a private equity firm, and there was actually a technologist who understood it and who used it in a compelling way, who was very real time with his thoughts. So I was very supportive of that. But what broke down is after the agreement, the time in between that and the actual purchasing was a disaster. And it was a disaster for everyone. It was a disaster for the company. It was a disaster for Elon.
It was a mess.
And then there was a situation where it was a forced purchase, and neither one of them wanted that occurrence to happen. And that was, the board pushing that. And there we are. So like everything that played out after that, you could predict because of the situation that came after it. So the intent going in, I think, was correct, but the path to actually resolve it and to make it real really harmed it and set up a recipe for disaster. But I believe that Twitter is, if it's nothing else, it's an idea. It's not just a company, and you cannot kill this idea. Like, it will live on. It will live on no matter where it is, what structure it's in. It captured something that is critical, that's fundamental in human nature, and that can be built upon. And it may manifest in different ways, such as Nostr and Bluesky and Threads and all these things, but it's going to live. And like, that's why I'm not concerned with the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows. Like, all these things are pendulum swings, and it will find a balance if you just let it. So like, all this stress about what someone might be currently doing to it, to me is not the concern. The concern is like there's single points of failure if you make this a company. And that's what needs to be removed for the sake of the company and for the sake of the people using the technology. Like we need to get to a protocol that will benefit everyone, and that will allow for the people in the market to actually decide like what matters and like where to steer this thing.
And then, by making it a protocol, it's making it so it isn't something that is the plaything of one billionaire or another. And I know that you are very financially well off and are grouped in that category, but one of the things that has really impressed me, both in the way in which Bluesky was created and the way in which your work on Nostr is you're not investing this for return, you're not taking equity, you're not taking control of this. You're trying to make it happen. And specifically to not put yourself or someone else back in that position of being the CEO.
Yeah. Well, not even making decisions. I think we're close now to personally granting over $80 million both to Nostr and Bitcoin developers, independent developers. And the way we've done it is not just me deciding to fund projects because I like them, but actually give it to organizations like OpenSets, who has a board where they're the deciders and they're putting the money. So I can't steer the direction of the protocol and I can't steer the direction of the client base. And that model, and there's Brink and all these HRF, and that model to me is just like perfect, because not only is it not me deciding the things, but it also has people who are deep in the work and deep in the space who are really understanding of the domain and actually helping to build it. They're seeing where the energy should go and where the money should flow. And, if any of that work or any of that money comes back to benefit Bitcoin and makes Bitcoin more accessible or more usable every day, or makes Nostr more usable every day and more accessible, I benefit from it personally. My company benefits from it as well. Because, for instance, if Bitcoin becomes everyday money, that means my company Square and Cash App can work anywhere in the world. And that's massively beneficial to us because we're constrained to the US right now, because we have to go market to market and get permission from Visa, MasterCard, and the banks to open within these markets. And I just don't think that's correct. So all these things over the long term benefit not just a community that's interested in these technologies, but also people and companies like my own.
I think it's important to see that work, that we're building a larger ecosystem. One of my great disappointments when Twitter and Facebook shut down their open APIs is the companies like Zynga. And I didn't like Farmville, but it was a major company that was like, people want to play games. They want to play social games. They want to do this thing. And they sort of lost their ability to do it. And we stopped innovating that space. We stopped building businesses on there because you couldn't trust it.
Yep.
The things that are exciting about Nostr, about Bitcoin, about other open protocols that are permissionless is you can build a business on it. You can build your livelihood, you can build a community, everything else, and no one's going to pull it out from underneath you.
Yeah, it all comes down to this concept of permissionless technology. What are the technologies where you don't need permission from a company, from a CEO, to work on what you want, to build what you want, to build a business around that? Those are the things that are durable. Again, that's like email. Google has built a phenomenal business in Gmail, phenomenal business on the web, HTTP, because they don't have to ask for permission. They can do what they want and build that thing on top of it. So that's why these open protocols are significant and important. And again, it's happening with AI as well. These AI companies are building platforms, and they're all incentivized around their own particular models. And
we have no say in them.
We have no say in them, and you have to ask them for permission. You have rate limits, and you have all these things. And even what the models spit back are constrained, and it limits the potential of really great ideas bringing humanity forward, because it's the decision of a group of CEOs that think they know best. And they may know best for their company, but they don't know the best for the creativity of the world and what people actually want to do with it.
And even if they, they can end up in a situation like Twitter ended up with, where there's best for the world, best for the platform, and best for the business. And they have to choose what's best for the business and the shareholder value over those other things.
Yeah, exactly. And again, they'll always have those incentives, and everyone is pulled along with it. Fortunately, there's a great movement in open source AI. And
it's super exciting. The idea of a world controlled by, a few companies that control all the AI, that control all the large language models and the agents, and if they restructure the economy with their own control, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. And DeepSeek was an important moment in this space for exactly that reason, like to show a different path and to provide something that is not only competitive, but better than the models that the corporations are putting out there. And that if we demand more of these open models that we can run on our laptops and run on, on our personal systems and even, our business systems, we can continue to innovate, and we can continue to invent and continue to make these more cost efficient and actually stay ahead and not be reliant upon 5 companies telling us that they know best and there should not be open source because it's dangerous. No, we should have these things in the open and race towards solutions that stay ahead of all the dangers. And we can't rely upon these single points of failure to protect us from these dangerous systems. Like, we have to build systems that allow us to be 10 steps ahead of adversaries, which we can do. And I think people are incentivized to do that if they have access to these technologies.
Yeah, and one of the things is you hear a lot of people saying, well, the large language models, they're stealing people's data and everything else, and they're using it. That only makes sense in the context of a world in which there are a few closed models and companies doing it. But copyright itself wasn't created to be a long-term permanent ownership. The idea was to incentivize creation a bit in a very limited way, and then put it back in the commons for everybody to learn on. And so in the open source large language models, the open models, if you've created something and it's in there, it's giving back to you too, because then you could use that and the creativity of everyone else on top of it. And it's quite tricky to figure out, but I think a bunch of people have a backlash against AI because they see it as another project of Silicon Valley billionaires.
That's extractive.
It's extractive.
Purely extractive. But yeah, but also, I mean, I think the copyright laws may have started with good intent, but they've been co-opted by corporations who become the gatekeepers of the
regulatory
revenue.
capture.
Yeah, they become the gatekeepers of the revenue for the actual creators. And they're getting paid more out than the creators are getting paid by those gatekeepers. So like, that needs to be either deleted or completely reformed. And I don't think it's right, but there's a path towards using these tools to increase creativity and to increase the velocity of our creativity. And I think it also recognizes the fact that like, ideas are coming from everywhere all the time, and we're mashing them up, and we're stealing all these ideas and putting in something that looks fundamentally new and looks original, but it is a mashup, and like that thing can't necessarily be owned. What can be expressed is like the evolution of it and like how it inspires other people, and recognizing that and being able to contribute to people in a more direct way, which is why I think Bitcoin is important. That doesn't go through the gatekeepers, and like really gives a true 100% value to people. That's what's needed. And that's what we didn't have in the early internet, which is why advertising on the internet
rose. The only option.
Yeah. You didn't have payments on the internet. It was designed for the web, but it was never implemented. Like Tim Berners-Lee had the designs for transmitting money, but it wasn't implemented. And if we had Bitcoin before Twitter was founded, we would have never gone the advertising route ever. And like, it would have...
Twitter never felt comfortable about its advertising anyway. Like,
no, it was latched on, and it was something that it just didn't feel right to the experience. But it felt right for the business to make money, to go public, and then Unfortunately, that was a goal instead of, starting with the goal of like what's going to be the most valuable to people using this, and like how are they actually using it, and what business model emerges from that. It's not necessarily brand advertising. It's certainly not, but it could have been like classified advertising. It could have been like Craigslist type advertising. And that's where I think something like Nostr eventually plays, is like, it's starting with Bitcoin. It's starting with payments. It's starting with like these communities, and you can imagine like a classified type model that actually works. And because money is built into it, like the manifestation of getting those products or, acting on those ads is like instantaneous across borders, across like, all these boundaries that don't exist on a platform like this.
It's interesting. You say Nostr started out with Bitcoin. The original version that Fiat Joff did, even though he was a Bitcoiner, didn't have Bitcoin in it. It was the open permissionless nature of it that let Will go and say, well, what if I attach a Lightning invoice? What if I attach the wallet? Like, the community was able to, just like early Twitter, say, oh, this is a tool and I can add the things.
Exactly.
When I looked at Bitcoin, I saw a bunch of influencers and a bunch of people who advocate a kind of right-wing politics, and a bunch of people who are talking about just accumulating, generational wealth. And one of the things that I found fascinating talking to you about it is the other side of it that isn't the influencers. That's the utility as permissionless money, as a way of empowering people who are unbanked, empowering people who are stuck, with cross-border transactions. I wonder if you could talk about sort of the progressive nature of Bitcoin.
All you have to do is look at the first page of the white paper, which I encourage everyone to do, which is it only sought out to solve one problem, which is verifying that there's no double spending. You're not spending twice without having to rely upon a third party. Like, it literally is just, how do we transmit money without having to rely on a Visa or MasterCard or a bank to tell us that this was not a double transaction? That was it. That was the innovation. And the title of the white paper is Electronic Peer-to-Peer Cash. Like, that was the dream. That was the intention. It was supposed to be a way to transmit money, protocol for the internet to transmit money anywhere without a Visa or MasterCard or a bank or any gatekeeper whatsoever. And it's become, and it's not like, I think the true Bitcoiner's dream is still that it's money, but it's become this like digital gold narrative, which I think is important, because like if it's valuable, more people want to work on it. And you can think of Bitcoin like you would an equity or an asset. And if I make it better, then that asset goes up, and I can, convert it to whatever I need, or just, give it to merchants to pay for food for my family, anything I need to do until it's widely, dramatically accepted. But it all goes back to that core concept of like, the internet needs a native currency. It needs an open protocol for money transmission. Otherwise, we're reliant upon a Visa, a MasterCard, a Stripe, a Square, all these companies, and you have to get permission from them to use them. And I just don't think that's fair for something as fundamental as money. And I also don't think it's fair for something fundamental as speech, which is where Nostr comes in.
I think it's fascinating. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history, but Proudhon, the sort of French anarchist, was part of the Paris Commune in 1848. He said that they needed to create their own mutual banks. They needed to create their own money. Yeah. And so one of the ideas of these, 19th century worker movements was they were going to create their own autonomous money system that wasn't dependent on the central state. And they saw it as very critical. And the credit unions we see today are the very corporatized descendants of that. But if you're constantly asking for permission for stuff, then you can't build something that radically changes the system.
Yeah, and something like Bitcoin and Cashew allow you to effectively be your own bank. Like, you have a wallet, and the wallet is actually just like your collection of keys to access your Bitcoin on the network, and you don't have to ask for permission to get money out of it. You just take the money out of it, or you send the money. Whereas a typical bank, you have to go into a teller, you have to go online, you are trying to request money. They have some sort of controls that looks at velocity or looks at fraud patterns, and sometimes they get those things wrong. So I want to take, $1,000 out for some reason. My account suggests that I should only be able to take $500 out, and then I'm begging the thing to say, no, I need $1,000 this week. And it just, we can't exist that way. It just doesn't make sense. And there's much better ways to determine actually fraudulent activity if you open up the ledger and you make it all visible, which is what Bitcoin is. So it's really important to see these, see the layers of the stack, and the fundamental layers. We need a permissionless protocol. We need it for money. We need it for speech. And then on top of that, you build the interface and distribution. And that's where people can really compete. Open source developers can compete for people's attention. Companies can compete for people's attention. And it's just a question of what value are you bringing to me, and why do I want to stay with you? But if I don't want to stay with you,
you have the right to exit.
You make it easy for me to go somewhere else because it's built into the protocol itself. I can access my Bitcoin through this company's wallet, or through this open source wallet, or through anything else on the network, and it doesn't matter. I can also access my speech through your Nostr client, or Will's Nostr client, or Primal, and it doesn't really matter. It's just what brings me the most value. But I own my keys, I own my data, I own my graph, and I can just access it through any of these interfaces. That to me is nirvana, and that's why we're here, and then that's why we're building what we're building.
Yeah, and then once we have that protocol, then we can build layers on top of it. We can say, what is the equivalent of Facebook groups? What are communities? How do we provide groups of people to collaborate and plan and fundraise together to meet their own needs in a way that allows for privacy? There's a new emerging standard, message layer security, that provides sort of signal style encryption. And one of the things that excites me so much is we've now got it working on top of Nostr.
Yeah.
Because we can then say, now we can have private communication. Now we can have scalable private groups. And that's part of what is the divergence from Bluesky. Bluesky is only chasing the public conversation. You can't hide blocks. There's no private accounts and everything else. And they optimize for that one thing. And Nostr now says you can have those public conversations, you can have those private conversations, you can have all these different kinds of community groups that can set their own rules and choose where they want to exist. And no one who is not in the group can see what's going on in the group. And they can manage their own money and their own content and their own rules, and they're autonomous. And that is sort of the dream of the future, which is people own the means of communications.
Yeah, just giving more people agency over their money, over their communication.
I have two questions to ask before we wrap up. One is, what should listeners and people who care about this stuff do?
I think getting into this world is challenging because it feels very abstract and it feels too big. But just dedicating a little bit of time every day to trying it. You don't have to go fully deep, but just trying it a tiny bit. Signing up for something that looks easy in Nostr or in Bitcoin, and just playing with it, just going at it with a sense of play. I think you don't have to go all in to get value out of it. And if it's not valuable to you right now, that's okay. It may be valuable to you later, and we intend for it to be valuable for you later. So if the concept of permissionless doesn't resonate at the moment because you just don't need it, that's fine. But eventually it might be critical. And just observe those moments where you have to ask for permission for something, to use something that's fundamental to you, whether it be your bank branch or your bank account, your credit card, or even like how you communicate with your family or your colleagues. You may have run into a situation where WhatsApp blocks your account or shuts you down for a temporary thing, or you lose your password and you have to go through customer support. Those are all moments where you're asking permission from a company. And just know that you may want to put up with those for not right now because they're convenient, but there's an alternative where you own everything and you don't have to ask permission. But right now it requires a little bit more work because they're not as accessible as those things. They're not as convenient as those things. So it's just observing these things in your daily life and just like, where do I have to ask for permission and why? And do I want to shift a little bit of my attention to something where I don't? Just a little bit.
Why can't I put a link in my, description of an image I post on Instagram?
Yeah.
Like, why do I have the whole link tree thing and link in bio? Or why do people put an alternate account because they're worried about their accounts being deleted?
Yeah, exactly. Just observing that, I think is everything right now.
And as I go on this podcast and talk to people, do you have any suggestions of who else I should talk to?
I think what's lacking in the space right now is like, you're talking with people like me who've built stuff, but like, I think we need to talk more with people who aren't builders, but people who are using these technologies, or more importantly, not using those technologies, and like what problems they have. So I would love to see just like more people who have these needs, who have these problems, that don't have the solutions or aren't aware that these technologies that we're building are actually solving those problems, or they've tried them and they don't work. And like, why? And I know you're doing this because you do a ton of research on how people use these technologies or can't use these technologies, and as a way to like make them better. But I think that needs to be brought to like venues like this as well. And because it helps people like me and all the other builders, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And showing that in a more broader state instead of reading documents and all these interviews, and like it resonates a lot more and resonates faster.
Yeah, absolutely. We put the founders of these companies and the people who create the apps and everything else on a pedestal, as the brilliant people who sort of had it all appear in their head.
Yeah, they're not.
But the reality is, it's this community of innovation, and it is listening to the users and understanding their needs and co-designing it with them.
Yep.
That actually makes things that work for people and change the world.
100%.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing everything that we're building going forward.
I agree. Thanks for always fighting.
Yeah. Thanks again to our guest, Jack Dorsey, for coming on revolution.social. Our intro and outro music is a remix of the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao, courtesy of White Records.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan, from Flock Marketing.
To learn more about the Social Media Bill of Rights and sign up for our email newsletter, visit revolution.social.
And for more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nostr's Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.